The Cursed Swamp Cabin. Author Grzegorz. Welcome to Whispers of Shadow. If you ever find a house deep in the woods, whose walls are wet from the inside, don't go in. If you hear footsteps coming from beneath the floorboards, run. And if you find an old photograph showing people standing knee-deep in a black swamp, and one of them is staring directly at you, then it's already too late. Because that is exactly how the story of the Cursed Swamp Cabin began. A story that the people of the surrounding villages still refuse to talk about. A story about a house that should have vanished, along with the terrible secret hidden beneath it. Prologue. In the autumn of 2024, a small box of forgotten documents arrived at a regional archive in northern Poland. The box came from a forestry station that had recently been closed. Inside were old maps, weather reports, photographs, and maintenance records. Most of the material was ordinary, until an archivist discovered a thin folder marked 17-B, Black Marsh Cabin. The folder contained several photographs, a few handwritten notes, and a transcript of an interview conducted in 1978. That was the first time anyone outside the local area learned about the place, later known as the Cursed Swamp Cabin. A small wooden house, standing alone in the middle of a vast marsh. Far from roads, far from towns, far from anything that felt safe or normal. According to old records, the cabin had been built before World War II. A forest ranger lived there with his wife and young daughter. For many years, nothing unusual happened. The family lived quietly. The ranger managed the surrounding forest. Hunters occasionally visited. Travelers sometimes stopped by for directions. Everything seemed ordinary until the autumn of 1953. That was when people noticed the ranger had stopped coming into town. He no longer collected supplies. He stopped attending forestry meetings. No one saw him at the market. No one saw his family. At first, nobody worried. The cabin was isolated. People often went weeks without seeing each other. But after nearly 2 months had passed, concern began to grow. Eventually, 2 villagers volunteered to check on the family. Neither of them ever forgot what they found. The cabin was still standing. The windows were shut. The door was closed. Nothing appeared unusual from the outside. But the moment they stepped onto the porch, they noticed a strange smell. Rotting water, mud, decay. The smell of a swamp. The problem was that the smell seemed to be coming from inside the house. One of the men knocked. No answer. The other tried the handle. The door slowly opened on its own, and the smell became even stronger. Inside, everything appeared untouched. Plates sat on the kitchen table. Tools hung neatly on the walls. A coat remained beside the door. It looked as if the family had simply stepped outside for a few minutes and never returned. Then one of the men noticed something strange. The floorboards were wet, not in one room, not in one corner, everywhere. Moisture covered the entire floor, as though water was seeping upward from beneath the house. Neither man understood how that was possible. The cabin had no basement. Nothing should have existed under the floor, except solid ground. Yet every board felt damp beneath their boots. The worst discovery waited in the bedroom. A family photograph hung on the wall. The ranger, his wife, their daughter. A normal family portrait. Until one of the visitors looked closer. Far behind the family, hidden among the trees, stood a tall, dark figure. Far too tall to be a person. Its head nearly touched the branches above. The two men stared at the photograph in silence. Then they left the house immediately. Without searching further, without speaking, because for the first time in their lives, they felt as though something inside that cabin had been watching them. The disappearance of the ranger's family remained unsolved. No bodies were found, no signs of violence, no explanation. Only an abandoned cabin slowly sinking deeper into the swamp with every passing year. For decades, locals avoided the place. Parents warned their children never to go near Black Marsh. Hunters changed their routes. Fishermen stayed away. And eventually, the cabin became little more than a local legend. A story told around fires. A warning whispered after dark. Until the summer of 1978, when 3 university students arrived in the region. And everything began again. The students were biology researchers. Their goal was simple: document rare bird species living in the wetlands. They came from another part of the country. They had never heard the stories, and even if they had, they probably would not have believed them. They were young, curious, confident, the kind of people who believed every mystery could be explained, every superstition disproven, every ghost story reduced to a misunderstanding. For 3 days, they explored the marsh, collected samples, recorded observations, mapped wildlife activity. Then, during one of their surveys, they found the cabin, hidden behind curtains of reeds and dead trees, exactly where the old maps said it would be. Even after 25 years, the building was still standing. The wood had darkened. The roof sagged. Several windows were broken. Yet somehow, the structure remained intact, as if time itself had forgotten it. The oldest student, Marek, later admitted that something felt wrong the moment he saw it. Not fear, not danger, something stranger. The feeling that the cabin had been waiting for someone to return. That evening, The three entered the building. The front door still opened easily. The smell of swamp water remained. The floorboards were still wet, and almost immediately they heard something. A sound. Very faint, very distant, almost impossible to notice. Drip, drip, drip. Water falling somewhere below them. The students followed the sound through the house, room after room, listening, searching, until they reached the old bedroom. There, the sound became louder, much louder. Drip, 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 coming directly from beneath the floor. One floorboard looked different from the others. Newer, less worn, as if someone had replaced it years ago. Marek knelt beside it, tapped it with his knuckles. The response echoed upward, a hollow sound. There was empty space beneath. For nearly 2 hours, they struggled to pry the board loose. Finally, it lifted, and beneath it, they discovered something no blueprint had ever mentioned. A hidden hatch. The hatch led downward, into darkness, into a narrow tunnel, carved beneath the cabin. A tunnel that should not have existed. The house had never been built with a basement, yet someone had created an underground passage and hidden it. The students grabbed flashlights and descended. The air became colder, damp, heavy. Roots pushed through the walls. Mud coated every surface. The tunnel stretched farther than any of them expected. After several minutes, they reached a chamber, a small underground room. Inside they found old lanterns, broken tools, dozens of melted candles, evidence that someone had spent a great deal of time there, perhaps years. Then they noticed the walls. Every inch of stone was covered in symbols. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. None resembled any language they recognized. They looked ancient, primitive, almost ritualistic. Marek photographed everything. Those photographs still exist. Most show nothing but mud and symbols. But one image contains something impossible, something none of the students noticed when the picture was taken. In the corner of the photograph stands a figure, tall, thin, bent slightly forward, watching. The problem was simple. Nobody had been standing there. When Marek developed the film weeks later, he swore the chamber had been empty. Yet the figure remained visible, silent, waiting. The students spent about 30 minutes underground. Then they returned to the surface. They agreed to come back the next morning with better equipment. They never got the chance. That night, shortly after 2 in the morning, a scream woke them. A human scream, terrified, desperate, coming from somewhere inside the swamp. Marek and another student rushed from their tent. The third student was gone. His sleeping bag was empty. His flashlight remained beside his bed. Only muddy footprints led away from the campsite toward the cabin. The two young men followed the tracks, calling his name, searching the darkness. Then the fog arrived. Not ordinary fog, not natural fog. A thick gray wall that swallowed the forest within minutes. The sounds of insects vanished. Birds fell silent. Even the wind seemed to disappear. Only footsteps remained. Not their footsteps, someone else's, moving slowly through the trees around them, circling them, keeping pace, always just beyond sight. Marek later described seeing a shape standing knee-deep in black water, a towering silhouette, far taller than any human being, motionless, watching. Then it vanished. Just before dawn, they found the missing student. He was sitting outside the cabin, covered in mud, staring at the wall, completely unresponsive. He did not react when they spoke, did not react when they touched him, did not react when they shouted his name. Hours later, he finally spoke, only once, only a single sentence. "They are still under the house." Then he fell silent. Forever. Doctors later described his condition as severe psychological trauma, but nobody could explain what he had seen or who they were. The incident attracted official attention. Investigators arrived. The tunnel was discovered. The chamber was documented. The symbols were recorded. But when authorities entered the underground room, everything had changed. The symbols were gone. The candles were gone. The tools were gone. As though the entire chamber had been cleaned overnight, or as though it had never existed. Only bare walls remained. And something else, something mentioned only in a private notebook later recovered from the archives. According to one investigator, there was another tunnel beneath the chamber, a much older tunnel, a much deeper tunnel, one leading directly beneath Black Marsh itself. And that discovery would reveal something far older than the cabin, far older than the ranger, perhaps older than the forest itself. The investigation should have ended there. The tunnel should have been sealed. The reports should have been archived. And Black Marsh should have remained nothing more than an old local legend. But the discovery of the second tunnel changed everything. In October of 1978, authorities quietly closed off the area around the cabin. Officially, they claimed geological instability. Unofficially, they were trying to understand what had been found beneath the marsh. Excavation teams arrived. Scientists, surveyors, engineers. For a short time, Black Marsh became one of the most closely monitored locations in the region. And almost immediately, strange incidents began to occur. At first, the reports seemed harmless. Workers complained of hearing footsteps behind them. Several claimed they saw lights moving through the swamp at night. Others reported hearing voices, faint whispers, always coming from somewhere beyond the fog. Supervisors dismissed the stories. Long hours, isolation, stress, nothing more. But then the workers began quitting. One man refused to return after claiming he saw a tall figure standing among the reeds. Another resigned after hearing someone call his name from the marsh. A third worker abandoned his equipment and drove away without explanation. Within 2 weeks, nearly half the crew wanted to leave. One evening, the site supervisor decided to remain alone after dark. He intended to prove that the stories were nonsense. He brought a flashlight, a notebook, and a camera. At 10:07 p.m., he wrote his final entry. "I can see it. Nothing else. Just those 4 words." Below them, written in shakier handwriting, was another sentence. "It is closer now." The next morning, the supervisor was found sitting beside the excavation site, alive, but completely broken. He never explained what happened, never returned to work, and never spoke about Black Marsh again. Around the same time, the excavation reached something unexpected. Several meters beneath the swamp, workers uncovered an enormous wooden structure. At first, they believed it was an ancient dock, then perhaps the remains of a settlement. But further digging revealed the truth. It was neither. The structure formed a massive circular platform, buried deep beneath centuries of mud. Far older than the cabin, far older than any known settlement in the region. Carbon dating suggested an impossible age, several hundred years, possibly more than 1,000. At the center of the platform was a circular shaft, 3 meters across, descending straight into darkness. The opening appeared bottomless. Weights were lowered. No impact was heard. Lights were lowered. They vanished into blackness. No one could determine its depth. Official reports described it as a natural geological formation. But private notes told a different story, because several workers claimed they could hear sounds rising from the shaft. Not water, not wind. Voices, whispers, conversations. As though people were speaking somewhere far below the earth. At first, nobody believed them. Then one of the technicians recorded the sound. The tape survives to this day, damaged, distorted, filled with static. Yet after enhancement, investigators identified something chilling. Words, human words. The first was clear. "Come back." The second was even clearer, lower. The third could never be fully understood. But everyone agreed it sounded human. And that made no sense. There should have been nobody beneath the swamp. A few days later, workers discovered a rusted metal box hidden beneath the cabin's foundation. Inside were photographs, letters, and a journal. The journal belonged to the missing ranger. The same ranger who vanished in 1953. Its earliest entries were ordinary: weather observations, forest conditions, supply records, routine daily notes. Then the tone changed. The ranger began writing about noises, strange lights, animals abandoning the area. Weeks later, his entries became darker. I hear footsteps beneath the cabin. Something walks around the house at night. The tracks end at the wall. They do not continue. A few pages later, my daughter says, "Someone lives beneath us." My wife hears voices after sunset. I no longer allow either of them outside at night. The floor is wet again. There has been no rain. Then came the entry that frightened investigators most. There is knocking beneath the house. 3 knocks. Always 3. The handwriting deteriorated from that point onward. Letters became uneven. Words trailed across the page. The writing looked terrified. The final entries were written over only a few days. The opening is real. I found the entrance. It was here before the forest. It was here before the village. Then, she comes from the swamp at night. She watches the cabin. She watches us. I do not think she is alone. Several pages were left blank. Then investigators reached the final entry. The last words the ranger ever wrote. I hear them beneath the floorboards. They sound exactly like my wife. They sound exactly like my daughter. They are both asleep upstairs, but I still hear them below me. The journal ended there. No final explanation, no conclusion, no farewell, only silence. For investigators, the implication was horrifying. Either the ranger had lost his mind, or something beneath Black Marsh had learned how to imitate the voices of the people he loved. And only days later, they would uncover evidence that made the second possibility impossible to ignore. Because on October 14th, 1978, a camera was lowered into the shaft. And for the first time in history, someone saw what waited at the bottom. October 14th, 1978, 9:43 a.m. The sky above Black Marsh was gray. The air was cold. A thin layer of fog drifted over the water. Conditions were considered ideal for documentation. No one knew they were about to record the final piece of evidence before the disaster. The camera was attached to a steel cable. Power cables were secured. Floodlights were tested. Everything worked perfectly. The plan was simple. Lower the camera into the shaft. Document the interior. Measure its depth. Determine where it led. The first few minutes showed nothing unusual. Damp stone, roots, mud, the circular walls of the shaft disappearing into darkness. Then the tunnel widened. The deeper the camera descended, the less natural the shaft appeared. The walls looked carved, shaped, deliberately constructed. One technician noticed long vertical marks covering the stone. Thousands of them. At first, they were mistaken for cracks, then roots. But as the camera descended further, the truth became harder to ignore. They looked like claw marks, deep, repeated, covering every surface, as though something had spent centuries trying to climb upward, trying to escape. The descent continued. Then someone spotted bones, small fragments at first, then larger pieces, embedded directly into the walls. Human bones, skulls, ribs, hands, dozens of them, possibly hundreds. The chamber grew silent. No one spoke. No one wanted to be the first to say what everyone was thinking. Whatever lay beneath Black Marsh, people had been ending up there for a very long time. Then the camera finally reached the bottom, or what they believed was the bottom. The floodlights illuminated an enormous underground cavern, far larger than anyone expected, and in the center stood something impossible, a structure, not a cave formation, not ruins, a building, ancient, black, massive. It looked as though it belonged beneath the ocean floor, not beneath a forest swamp. The walls were covered in symbols, the same symbols discovered in the underground chamber beneath the cabin. But these were older, far older. Every surface displayed the same image, again and again. A tall figure standing in water, watching, waiting. The exact same figure seen in old photographs. The same figure described by witnesses. The same figure seen in the marsh at night. Then something happened. Something nobody expected. The camera rotated slightly, only a few degrees, and illuminated a section of the cavern hidden from view. For less than a second, everyone watching froze. There were people standing there, dozens of them, standing knee-deep in black water, motionless, facing the camera. At first, the operators assumed they were statues. Then one of them moved. Slowly, very slowly, its head turned toward the lens. Several people in the control tent shouted simultaneously. The image zoomed in. The figure raised its arm, not aggressively, not threateningly, almost as if it were trying to communicate or warn them. Then the video feed flickered. Static flooded the screen. The lights began to pulse. For a fraction of a second, another shape appeared behind the figures. Something enormous, much taller than anything human. Its upper body vanished beyond the frame. The operators never saw its full form, only a silhouette. And then the transmission died completely. The camera stopped functioning. The feed never returned. Investigators later recovered the equipment, but the final seconds remained corrupted. Whatever appeared behind those figures was never fully captured. Yet that was enough. The excavation should have been shut down immediately. Instead, they made a fatal mistake. They stayed. They wanted answers, and Black Marsh was finally ready to give them. That evening, strange events spread throughout the entire camp. Workers reported hearing voices, not random voices, familiar voices, the voices of family members, friends, loved ones, people who were nowhere near the site. One technician claimed he heard his dead brother calling him from the fog. Another swore his mother was standing outside his tent. A third insisted he could hear children laughing beneath the ground. Panic began to spread. Then one of the camera operators disappeared. He had been responsible for monitoring the live feed. The last person to see him alive reported something strange. The operator was walking toward the cabin, alone, slowly, as if sleepwalking, as if listening to something nobody else could hear. He never returned. Search teams combed the marsh. Nothing. The forest. Nothing. The tunnels. Nothing. The only thing they found was his notebook. It was lying inside the cabin, on the wet floor. The final page contained 3 sentences. The handwriting was chaotic, almost unreadable. I hear them beneath the boards. They are speaking with my voice. And finally, she is already inside the house. The notebook ended there. No body was ever found. That night, authorities made a decision. The excavation would be terminated, the tunnel sealed, the cabin demolished, the site abandoned. But they were already too late, because the following night, Black Marsh awakened, the night of October 14th, 1978. That was the night everything collapsed. Not just the investigation, not just the excavation, everything. The order to evacuate had already been issued. Equipment was being packed, vehicles prepared, documents secured. By sunrise, everyone was supposed to leave Black Marsh forever. But shortly before midnight, something happened. Every radio stopped working at the exact same moment. No warning, no static, no gradual failure. 1 second they worked. The next, they were silent. Then the generators died. Floodlights vanished. The entire camp was swallowed by darkness. Engineers later confirmed there was no mechanical failure. The fuel tanks were full. The wiring was intact. Nothing should have happened. Yet everything shut down simultaneously. Moments later came the sound. 3 knocks. Tock, tock, tock. Everyone heard it. The sound rose from beneath the earth. Not beneath one tent. Not beneath one building. Beneath the entire marsh. Tock, tock, tock. Then silence. Then 3 more. Tock, tock, tock. The same knocking described in the Ranger's journal 25 years earlier. The same knocking heard beneath the cabin. The same knocking heard beneath the floorboards. Several workers began to panic. Others laughed nervously. A few attempted to restart the generators. Then the fog arrived. Not ordinary fog. This fog moved. It flowed across the marsh like water. Within minutes, visibility dropped to only a few feet. The forest vanished. The vehicles disappeared. Even nearby tents became impossible to see. And then the voices started. At first, they were faint, then unmistakable. Every person heard someone different. One man heard his wife, another heard his father, one woman heard her daughter. Several people heard relatives who had been dead for years. Yet every voice came from the same place, the swamp, calling them, inviting them, begging them to come closer. A technician suddenly stood up, without speaking, without expression, and began walking into the fog. Others followed, almost hypnotized, as if something inside the marsh was pulling them forward. Fortunately, most were stopped. Most, not all. 2 workers vanished that night. Gone. No screams, no footprints, no trace. Only empty darkness. Around midnight, someone pointed toward the cabin. A light was shining from an upstairs window. A warm, yellow light. The cabin had been abandoned for 25 years. Yet now, it looked occupied, as though someone was home. One investigator photographed it. The image survived. It still exists in the archive. At first glance, it shows nothing unusual, just a glowing window. But when enlarged, 3 figures become visible behind the glass. A man, a woman, a little girl, standing perfectly still, watching the camp. Experts later compared the image to the ranger's family photographs. The resemblance was almost perfect. The ranger, his wife, his daughter, looking out from a house. They should not have been inside, because they had disappeared 25 years earlier. Then another incident occurred. One of the drivers attempted to leave. His truck started immediately. He drove away. Less than 5 minutes later, he returned, terrified, pale, shaking uncontrollably. At first, he could barely speak. Finally, he whispered, "The road brought me back." Nobody understood until 2 more drivers tried, and both returned with the same story. No matter which direction they drove, they eventually found themselves facing the cabin again. It was impossible to leave. The marsh had become a maze, a trap. Around 2 in the morning, the fog began changing shape. Witnesses later struggled to describe it. The mist seemed to gather into forms, human forms, dozens of them, standing motionless among the reeds. People, or things pretending to be people. Some workers recognized faces, lost relatives, missing friends, people who had vanished years earlier. One man swore he saw the ranger himself, standing waist-deep in black water, staring directly at the cabin, waiting. Then the front door opened, slowly, with a long creak. Everyone fell silent. The doorway remained empty for several seconds. Then something stepped outside. Not a man, not an animal, something else, something tall, far too tall. Its body seemed made from darkness and wet earth. Its limbs were unnaturally long. Its movements were wrong, as though it had learned how to imitate a person, without truly understanding how people moved. It stood on the porch, then slowly turned toward the camp, and every single witness heard the same voice, not from the creature, from everywhere. The fog, the swamp, the cabin, the ground beneath their feet. One voice, one command: come back. And that was the moment everyone realized the truth. Whatever had taken the ranger's family, whatever had lived beneath Black Marsh, it had never left. And now it knew they were there. For several seconds, nobody moved, nobody ran, nobody screamed. It was as if the entire camp had forgotten how. The words still echoed through the fog. Come back. Then silence returned. A silence so complete, it felt unnatural. And from somewhere deep within the swamp came another sound. Splash, splash, splash. Hundreds of splashes, as though countless feet were moving through shallow water, slowly, patiently, getting closer. One of the workers switched on a portable floodlight. The beam cut through the fog, and everyone saw them. Figures, dozens of figures, standing knee-deep in the black water, motionless, watching. Some looked human, others only resembled humans. Every one of them faced the cabin, and among them stood the tall figure, the same figure from the photographs, the same figure carved into the ancient stones below the marsh, the same figure seen by workers, by students, by the ranger. For the first time, they saw it clearly. Its body appeared to be made of mud and roots. Wet earth dripped from its arms. Long strands of black swamp grass hung from its shoulders. Its skin looked like rotting bark. But the worst thing was its face, because where its eyes should have been, there was nothing. Only darkness, endless darkness. A darkness deeper than the surrounding night. Several people finally broke. They ran. Others fell to their knees. Some simply stared, unable to look away. Then the ground shook. The vibration rolled through the marsh. The water trembled. The reeds bent, and a deep sound rose from below. A sound like stone breaking beneath the earth. The cabin shuddered violently. Windows exploded outward. Glass rained into the swamp. The front door slammed open, and an unbearable smell poured from inside. Rotting water, decay, something ancient, something buried. Several witnesses vomited instantly. Then someone pointed toward the upstairs window. A little girl was standing there, pale, motionless, dressed in clothing from another era. Nobody had any doubt it was the ranger's daughter, exactly as she appeared in the old photographs. For a few seconds, she simply stared. Then she raised one hand and pointed downward, toward the floor beneath her feet, as though she wanted them to understand something, as though she had been trying to send the same message for 25 years. Then she vanished. A moment later, the floor collapsed. The roof followed. The cabin began to sink. Not collapse. Sink. Slowly. Steadily. As if something beneath the marsh was pulling it downward. Board by board. Wall by wall. The entire structure descended into the black water. And then the hands appeared. Hands emerging from the mud. Dozens. Then hundreds. Thin, pale, covered in swamp water. Reaching upward. Grasping at the sinking cabin. Or perhaps pulling it down. No witness ever agreed on which. Within minutes, almost nothing remained. Only part of the chimney. Then even that disappeared. The marsh closed over the site, and the cabin was gone, as if it had never existed. By dawn, the fog had vanished. The voices were gone. The roads worked normally again. The radios functioned. The vehicles started. Everything seemed normal. Except for one thing. The cabin was missing. Completely missing. No foundations. No debris. No underground chamber. No shaft. Nothing. Investigators searched for days. The entire excavation site had disappeared, as though the swamp had swallowed every trace. Weeks later, the operation was officially terminated. Reports were sealed. Files were classified. Black Marsh was removed from several maps. The public was never told what happened. But not every piece of evidence vanished. One photograph remained. The final photograph, taken that night. At first it seemed unremarkable. Fog, trees, dark water, nothing else. But years later, Digital enhancement revealed something disturbing. Standing where the cabin once stood were people, dozens of them, standing knee-deep in the swamp, watching the camera. Among them, investigators identified several faces. The ranger, his wife, his daughter, the missing technician, the two workers who disappeared, and many others. Some had been missing for years, some for decades. Then came the final discovery. In 2024, a researcher enlarged a small section of the image. Hidden near the edge of the frame was another figure, almost invisible, partially concealed by reeds. Unlike the others, it wasn't looking at the camera. It was looking somewhere else, toward the position where the photographer had been standing. The researcher compared distances, angles, measurements, and realized something impossible. The figure should not have been in front of the camera. It should have been standing behind it, as if it were beside the photographer. Watching him, when the face was enhanced, everyone studying the image became silent, because the figure did not resemble any of the missing people. It resembled the photographer himself. The same face, the same eyes, the same expression, standing in the swamp. Before he had even taken the picture, no one has ever explained how that was possible. No one has ever explained what truly lived beneath Black Marsh, and no one has ever found the cabin again. But one final note was discovered written on the back of the photograph. A sentence written in faded ink. A sentence nobody could trace to any known witness. It read, "The swamp does not take people. The swamp remembers them." Epilogue. If you ever find yourself deep in the woods and you discover an old cabin standing alone in the marsh, do not go inside. If you hear footsteps beneath the floorboards, leave immediately. And if someone you love calls your name from the fog, do not answer, because the voice may not be coming from the forest. It may be coming from beneath it. The end.